Welcome back to The Drive. Bob and Jeff, Jock Oliver in from Classic Hits KEYN. Happy and honored to be talking with Ian Anderson, founder of Jethro Tull. They'll be in Kansas City at the Starlight Theater coming up August 1st, their 50th anniversary tour. And Ian, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, it's nice to be with, frankly, nice to be with anybody. I think at my age, it's just nice to wake up in the morning, which is one of my favorite hobbies.
Well, we feel kind of the same way.
knowing that I have at least another day ahead of me to enjoy doing what I do and have been doing for so many years. One day, of course, is going to come to an end, but if I'm lucky enough to have a few more days or a few more years, then that's a blessing, given the enormous amount of musical activity that I've been able to enjoy.
Just so enamored with an unbelievable career that you have. If you can take me back to a time where you had a vision for what you maybe wanted to accomplish musically. Did you have that vision, and has it happened the way maybe you thought it would all those many years ago?
When I began listening to music, it was really as a child hearing big band jazz of the wartime era. And later as a teenager, when I heard Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and a whole host of Black American blues artists, then all of that began to gel into a huge respect and energized love for essentially blues and jazz. But at the same time, I knew that this wasn't me. This was something that it was a wonderful flirtation with quite an alien world and an alien culture. But I knew that it wasn't something that I long term could really feel good about imitating and getting paid for. That seemed to me slightly at odds with my respect for the music. So when I had the opportunity with the second Jethro Tull album to embark on something a little more eclectic and musically adventurous, then it was the opportunity to, I suppose, show my musical and cultural background, which essentially is Northwestern Europe, and then embodied elements of classical music and folk music and the various and church music, things that I grew up with, which were from my world. They weren't from the south side of Chicago or the cotton fields of the deep south. It was the music of my culture in Northwestern Europe, and that's really what I suppose is the mainstay of what I've done. And if I had an ambition, it was really to find that approach to making music that would be a mixture of originality and creativity, but still nonetheless drawing upon elements that to me been very attractive and part of my many influences over the years. So I think that's what any of us perhaps do consciously or subconsciously. We draw upon a variety of influences, but we hope that we can bring something of ourselves into the mix to make it original and not too imitative.
Well, Ian, this being your 50th anniversary of touring with this band, it's like you're the band leader that puts all this together. And you're doing another 100 tours again this year. So when you're out there performing, we know that you'll bring on the songs the audience expects to hear because you do that. But what song are you performing this year on your tour that kind of gives you a personal pleasure that you like to play?
If I didn't like to play it, it wouldn't be in the set list. It's the simple answer to that. It's quite easy for me to find 20 pieces of music to play live on stage that I really love and for me are very important in terms of portraying the big picture of Jethro Tull over the years. But at the same time, whilst many of them may be quite familiar to most of the audience, there are always going to be two or three that perhaps they're not familiar with, that maybe the totally absorbed fan may know all of the material, but they're a very tiny percentage of an audience. Most folks will know a few songs and perhaps have some vague recollection of hearing a few more, but I think there's always going to be a few songs on the stage set people can say, oh, I wonder what album that was from. I don't remember that. But that's the way that it is, and I think that's part of the fun is being able to find some of those songs that maybe you haven't played for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and have that little moment of unveiling something that is a forgotten element of your personal musical history. And there are a few of those in the show. Probably not many, but a few. I mean, I can think of at least two things that I've never played live on stage until, the last few weeks when we started these tours, and quite a few more that I haven't played, very frequently in the last several years. So it's a mixture of very familiar, less familiar, and probably downright obscure.
Talking with Ian Anderson, the 50th anniversary of Jethro Tull. They're touring. They'll be at the Starlight Theater coming up on August 1st, and happy to talk to one of the icons in the music industry. You were raised, from what I can tell, had a pretty normal childhood, went to grammar school, went to college to study fine art. How did music enter your realm, Ian?
Well, as a child, it was listening to my father's collection of old 78 RPM records, and then being aware, I suppose, of the dawn of rock and roll, the emergence of Bill Haley and the Comets and Elvis Presley, to mention a couple that I think at the age of 8 or 9 years old I heard of. And all things Americana played quite a part in that post-war generation here in the UK because of that inevitable impact that came through a large number of American servicemen who were stationed in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, who brought with them their culture, their comic papers, their musical tastes. It was all part of growing up in those years following World War II. And we were beginning to get this little bit of TV stuff. We saw, perhaps in the late 50s, we began to, the average household, quite likely would have a television set, which meant that you were able to see Hopalong Cassidy and early TV westerns, and of course all the slightly more subtle cultural elements that came out through comedy, through documentary stuff, through serious movies, through romantic movies, through television and talk shows. A whole new phenomenon. The sitcom, wasn't something that was totally alien to the UK, but the American sitcoms, I Love Lucy or whatever. I mean, these were things that brought to a generation of young British people a profound sense of America's importance in the world. And along with that, of course, the music was hugely important. So by the time I was a teenager, then I guess 3/4 of what I listened to and was moved by was Americana. It was blues. It was jazz. Never really country and western, but that's something I have yet to form a real affinity for. But certainly blues and jazz. It was a big part of the lives of many of us who went on to become perhaps household names as musicians during the 60s and 70s.
We're talking with Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, their 50th anniversary and the tour coming up. You've released 30 studio albums, sold over 60 million records. So how did you get the idea for putting together the Jethro Tull, the string quartet that just came about here?
That was one of those little side projects that was lurking in the back of my mind as something I would quite like to do. Given the little bit of time that it needed to originate the material, the arrangements, and actually have the recording sessions and get it done. But it was something that we squeezed in during the latter part of 2016, working with my keyboard player, John O'Hara, who is a classically trained musician from the Royal College of Music, and so we worked together on choosing songs, working on the arrangements, and recording with a string quartet that I found and went to listen to in one of their performances, a group called the Carducci Quartet, and great, relatively young musicians who brought a lot of enthusiasm and interest and very much open-minded in regard to performing music, which was not, of course, classical music, but it was being presented as arrangements that were very much, in keeping with the tradition of classical string quartet writing. So it was something I think they had a good few days, enjoyable for them and enjoyable for me working with them. Having done it, it's done. I won't be doing that one again. I've played with orchestras, big and small, and string quartets, and I think that's something that may come up again in the future from time to time. But it's I think I've ticked a couple of boxes, having recorded with a larger orchestra and, of course, with a string quartet.
Ian Anderson with us. I hope you'll indulge me. I wanted to ask you about the Eagles. They're a band that obviously is a big band as well. Toured with you back in their beginnings when they were just getting started. Did you foresee them becoming this kind of an iconic band, and what were your impressions of them early on?
Well, when they toured with Jethro Tull, I think it was in 1972, and we were playing some of the music. I think that it might have been just before, or I think probably just before Thick as a Brick was released. But whatever it was, we were kind of established. We were a headline act, and the Eagles had just released a single called Take It Easy. And this was already shooting up the charts, and the Eagles were becoming rapidly very well known. And, I remember them being an unlikely opening act for Jethro Tull because they were pure American, very much an American sound, very laid back. They looked and sounded and behaved very much in the tradition of, I suppose, a slightly country-inspired Western act. They were great musicians, and they kept themselves to themselves. I don't think they particularly, on a social level, didn't really interface with us or us with them, but they were guys that I remember being around for a few nights on tour, and good to have had that opportunity to see some truly very American contemporary music. I mean, another act was Creedence Clearwater, who also toured. We did a few shows with them, and then and the band Mountain, who toured with Jethro Tull. Leslie West, New York man of considerable girth, and they were another of those very American bands that had an association with Jethro Tull for a tour or two.
Well, Ian, we know that you are the person who brought the flute sound to rock and roll to make it mainstream out there, where people really enjoyed hearing that sound. And I heard a story about you actually started as a rhythm guitar player, but then since everybody else was playing guitar, you decided to try something different. And you actually went to what we call a pawn shop here, and you traded in your guitar to get the flute and kind of learned to play your flute as the band was forming.
Having heard Eric Clapton in John Mayall's Blues Breakers, I realized his technique and skill and his interpretation was so far ahead of what I was able to do that maybe I should try and find something else to play. But the work of Eric Clapton, and to some extent some other of his peers, was behind the way that I learned to play flute, because I was playing the flute, but I was still thinking guitar. And the things that I played on the flute when I first managed to get a few notes out of it in December of 1967, just when the band was getting together and became Jethro Tull at the end of January in 1968. I think I'd been playing for about 5 weeks by that time. And so it was an opportunity really to bring an instrument into the context of blues and rock music, which was giving it some kind of equality with the electric guitar. The flute was not a complete stranger to pop music, but it was occasionally heard, but in a very decorative way. It was a pretty instrument. It was the fairy lights on the Christmas tree. And, I was more interested in making it the Christmas tree. I wanted it to be the roots and branches of the music, and to have that, that kind of equal pegging with the electric guitar as a central and dominant force within a rock band. So maybe that bit was relatively my contribution, but to this day, I suppose, it's hard to think of too many other flute players in the world of rock music. I think they mostly decided best left to me. We'll see what happens when I'm dead and gone. Maybe there'll be another rock flute player will rear his or her head and ready to be crowned. We'll see.
We're talking with Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. They'll be in Kansas City August 1st at the Starlight Theater. Before we let you go, Ian, our producer, Max Power, who's a music junkie, wanted me to ask you the question that I'm going to ask you about Bungle in the Jungle. Do you still see that as an accurate animal analogy on the human condition? Is there any chance that the film it was written for will see the light of day?
Well, the answer to the latter part is no. I did explore the idea of making a movie and spoke to a number of actors and writers some of whom probably be known around the world through their work elsewhere, and certainly from those folks were the people that I went out to talk to say they'd be interested in being part of it. They were very enthusiastic and very kind to me, but it was very very much apparent that finding producers and directors was a whole different ball game, because it was suddenly you're into the money end of movie making, and it became quite apparent that it would be difficult to get a British director who would be acceptable to American producers, or if you like, the Hollywood movie industry. So that began to push things in an awkward direction for me, because the movie I was making really would have been, I think, very British in its feel. I mean, apart from the actors, one person who I wanted to have involved as a writer was John Cleese of Monty Python. Whilst that was part of the beginning to have a growing success in the USA, I think it was a step too far, really, for the traditions of movie production. Getting the money, sourcing the money. You had to do it their way. And I lacked the time and the financial resources to just go ahead and do it. I mean, that's why I have enormous respect for Sylvester Stallone for having managed to do something against all the odds, not only as an actor but as a prime moving force to put something together in the face of a real lack of enthusiasm and financial and other help. He had this amazing courage and wherewithal to do that, and I know a little bit about just how hard that is. It's easy enough to do it in my walk of life. As a musician, you can be self-taught, you can cobble together a few things with a few friends and make a record on the cheap, and and you can be unknown one week and a household name the next. But movies are a whole different ballgame. Usually takes not weeks or months, but some years to bring something to fruition. And so I think I've learned my lesson. Leave that to the big boys and do the thing that I'm more familiar with as a privateer, someone who can operate, as a bit more of a lone wolf. You can do that in music. You can't do it in movies. But Bungle in the Jungle is a kind of a song that I feel, quite good about. It was written quite specifically for the War Child album as something that would be reasonably radio friendly. And I didn't think I was writing a pop hit, but certainly it was one that got its attention on American AM radio. It was part of that mix of music that got Jethro Tull some recognition with perhaps a rather broader audience than it otherwise had.
Well, we certainly appreciate talking with you, and we wish you the best of luck on your 50th anniversary tour, and thank you for all the great music that you've contributed to the world over your career, and have a great summer, Ian.
Well, we're looking forward to enjoying the spring weather, taking on a summer warmth here, even in the UK, where it's been sunny all day so far. So fingers crossed, later this evening I shall be able to go for a walk in the dying embers of a sunny afternoon, and it will be a nice opportunity to for a walk.
You still have a great way with words, Ian. Thank you very much for your time.
That's what I get paid for. Good to talk to you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.